Hi, this is Sean with Comic Book Secrets, and welcome to the latest Comic Book Value and Investment Survey. And today we will be talking about the Blue Chip X-Men comics. Today it'll be major X-Men keys, and then an upcoming episode will focus on some other desirable X-Men comic books. Now there's three issues I want to talk about today in particular. And why we're going to talk about these basically is their performance through the years, their values today, and once we talk about that, we'll actually get into some possible strategies for purchasing and selling these in the future and where you can find these for a discount. There's three major keys in the X-Men run, and those books are X-Men number 1, X-Men number 94, and Giant Size X-Men number 1. We'll start off with X-Men number 1, and it's the obvious choice here. It is the first issue of the series. It contains the origin, the first appearance of the X-Men team, and it also has the first Professor X and Magneto, which was kind of the most famous villain in the X-Men run. The performance over the years has been pretty amazing. It still sets record prices. The issue itself has a white cover, which makes it a little more difficult to find in high grade. It is prone to staining and really shows dirt. It's the opposite problem of like a black cover. Black covers tend to hide the dirt, but they also show any kind of nicks and little errors there, so making those very difficult to find in high grade. White covers, very similar. Like many other early 1960s X-Men comics, there are several copies out there that exhibit what they call Marvel chipping. This Marvel chipping was a phenomenon that happened when the blades used to cut the comic book were dull, and so you'd see basically a dull, what looked like a dull knife cut along the right-hand edge, which would be the chipping, and they've called that Marvel chipping. In early 2011, this comic book, actually the highest graded copy, a CGC 9.6, sold for $200,000. It's a pretty amazing price. It was a record price. CGC 9.4 copies are selling in a $100,000 range, but for those of us who have a little bit different budget going forward, you can actually get CGC 4.0, which would be about a very good copy in the $1,400 to $1,800 range, which is a little more reasonable. Now the next comic book I'd like to talk about as the blue chip investment is Giant Size X-Men number 1, which was released in the summer of 1975. Now if you're not familiar with the X-Men, they kind of had a poor showing in the late 60s, early 70s. They went into a reprint status, and there was really questioning whether this comic book would survive and this team would survive and continue. Well, in summer 1975, they kind of revamped the team, and it has some of the characters many people today are more familiar with. Nightcrawler, Storm, Colossus, Thunderbird were introduced in Giant Size X-Men number 1. It's also the second full appearance of Wolverine after Incredible Hulk 181. The comic book was a hit. It actually combines together with X-Men 94, and as they say, the rest is history. And this is really the foundation of this amazing run of movies, several different spin-off titles, and the phenomenon that X-Men has been today for Marvel. Solid performance over the years in this comic book. It is a giant-sized comic book. There's 68 pages, which means it has a square binding. Sometimes it makes it a little more difficult to find these in high grade, because if they were stacked, a book was put on top of anything, it can actually break the binding down a little bit and make it not as visually appealing, although the book is still intact, but it will take away from the grade. If you take a look at the prices here in 2011, CGC 9.8, which are the highest graded copies, are going from $4,400 to $6,000. So you need to be really careful on which copies you buy, and we'll get into that in the strategy section a little bit. And CGC 9.4 copies are going from $1,100 to $1,700. Now the final blue chip X-Men comic book, or the major keys of the run I want to talk about, is X-Men 94. And as we talked about, the team continues from the Giant Size X-Men number 1. Some of the old team members leave, leading to this new team, and once again it's part of the modern day X-Men phenomenon. One additional thing with this and Giant Size X-Men number 1 has going for them is some people collect what they call the ages, say Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, and what happens is they try to get comic books that they may have read when they were a kid and get those again as an adult. Well, adults that were raised or growing up reading comics in the 70s are pretty much Bronze Age collectors, and this book, along with Giant Size X-Men #1, would fit into a Bronze Age collection as well as just an X-Men collection. CGC 9.8 this year, selling for $12,000. You can get a little more reasonable price, 9.4s at $1,300 to $2,000, and if you just want a kind of a reading copy or a copy to complete a collection of X-Men, you can get a very good copy, what would be like a CGC 4.0 for $80. As far as strategies with these three X-Men comic books, they do sell well in all grades. I focus on the high grade. That would be more for the investment if you're hoping that it will hold value or maybe go up in value in the future and you're speculating on that. I'd go for the high grade, or I'd go more for the low grade, the 4.0 and lower for readers, and those are for the people who just want to complete their collection or they want to have that copy to read, so they're not going to spend the big dollars for an investment copy, and they'll go there. But they do sell well in pretty much all grades. And as I talked about in that Giant Size X-Men #1, that big span of prices, if you are at the high-end range and the investment collectible, you want to be very careful on page quality, what we call registration, which is how the book looks. Their eye appeal straight on. Sometimes the binding is a little bit off, so technically they still get that higher grade, but the eye appeal is not as great. One of the common errors you'll see, printing errors, you'll see a white line along the left-hand side of the comic book, and that's where the back cover is kind of a little bit on the front cover when it was bound. Now technically that's not a problem that'll take it down a grade, but it does affect the eye appeal, and that's where with some of those high-grade copies, when you see a big variation, like in the Giant Size X-Men #1, it was about a $1,600 variation. A lot of times that can be the difference in what people will pay for the comic book, so be careful there in the high end. For mid-grade comics, and here what I'm talking about is like fine comics, very fine minus in there, I tend to stay away from those because you're really not hitting the investment collector and you're not getting the reading collector or just the pure collector, the bottom end of the scale, just trying to get the comic book. So try to make your money on the way in. So get a good price if you're actually going to flip the book, or if you just want to have a little bit nicer copy in your collection, make sure you don't overpay for those mid-grade copies. That's my opinion there. If you check out the comicbooksecrets.com, there's a comic book crash course. It's absolutely free. I get into a lot more strategies in that course on these books. Now, if you are looking to find these books for a discount and you're watching this video on the Comic Book Secrets website below, you're going to see some places where you potentially would find these for discounts. And if you're not, if you're seeing this on another video site, go to comicbooksecrets.com/the blog, and there's all kinds of information there about where to find these comic books. And once again, in the Comic Book Secrets crash course, I give several strategies to buy comic books for discounts, and if you join, it's absolutely free. You get a 3-step video that talks about my specific strategies, where I go and how I set up a search system and a buying system to buy these videos or buy these comic books for inexpensive. Thanks for watching this investment survey. Keep your eye out at comicbooksecrets.com for more surveys on the X-Men and other valuable comics. Thanks again, and hope to see you on the site.